It was the summer of 2010, and four college friends, Emma, Jake, Sarah, and Matt, decided to go camping in the remote woods of the Pacific Northwest. They had been planning this trip for months, seeking an adventure before their final year of university. The spot they chose was miles away from any town, a secluded area by a crystal-clear lake surrounded by towering pine trees. It was the perfect escape from their busy lives, or so they thought. After a long hike, they set up camp by the lake, marveling at the beauty of nature. The first night was peaceful, filled with laughter, campfire songs, and the occasional howl of distant wildlife. They felt at ease, free from the pressures of the outside world. But the tranquility didn't last. On the second day, while exploring deeper into the woods, they stumbled upon something strange. Emma was the first to notice it, a tattered piece of fabric stuck to a tree branch, fluttering in the wind. It looked old, weathered by the elements, but it was clearly man-made. Jake shrugged it off, thinking it might have been left by another camper long ago. But as they continued walking, they found more strange things: shoes without owners, old camping gear scattered around, and even a rusty lantern that looked as if it hadn't been touched in years. The unease started to grow within the group. "Do you think someone got lost out here?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. Matt tried to reassure her, but even he couldn't hide his growing anxiety. That night, back at their camp, the mood had shifted. The sense of adventure was replaced with an underlying tension. As darkness fell, the forest around them became eerily quiet. No more distant howls, no rustling of leaves, just silence. Around midnight, as the fire dwindled, they heard it, a low, guttural sound coming from the woods. At first, they thought it was a wild animal, but then it got closer. Too close. Emma grabbed her flashlight and pointed it towards the source of the noise. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but revealed nothing. Yet the sound persisted, circling the campsite, as if something or someone was watching them. "We should leave," Matt said, his voice barely a whisper. The others nodded in agreement, but as they started to pack up their things, a blood-curdling scream echoed from the trees. It was a human scream, desperate, terrified, and coming from deep within the forest. Against their better judgment, Jake, always the bravest, grabbed the flashlight and ran towards the direction of the scream. "Wait here," he shouted, as he disappeared into the woods. The remaining three stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Minutes passed, then an hour. Jake didn't return. Panic set in. Sarah started crying, and Emma tried to calm her down, but she was on the verge of tears herself. Matt, determined to find his friend, insisted on going after him. Emma and Sarah begged him not to, but he went anyway, leaving the two girls alone by the dwindling fire. Another hour passed, and neither Jake nor Matt returned. The forest around them was still unnervingly silent, as if it were holding its breath. Then, without warning, they heard footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the darkness. "Jake," Emma called out, her voice trembling, but no one answered. No one answered. The footsteps got closer, and through the dim light of the dying fire, they saw a figure emerging from the trees. It was Matt, but something was wrong. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear, and his clothes were torn, as if he had been in a struggle. He stumbled towards them, muttering incoherently. "Matt, where's Jake?" "What happened?" Sarah asked, rushing towards him, but Matt didn't respond. Instead, he collapsed to the ground, shivering violently. His eyes darted around, as if he were still being chased by something unseen. "He's coming," Matt whispered, his voice barely audible. "We have to leave now." Without hesitation, Emma and Sarah grabbed their things, helping Matt to his feet. They abandoned their camp, running through the dark woods, guided only by the dim beam of their flashlight. Behind them, they could hear the sound of branches snapping, as if something or someone was following them. They ran for what felt like hours, until they finally reached the edge of the forest. Exhausted and terrified, they collapsed by the side of the road, waiting for help. The police arrived soon after and took their statement, but when they went back to the campsite, they found no trace of Jake or whoever or Weaver. The only thing they found was Jake's flashlight, lying in the middle of the woods, its battery dead. To this day, no one knows what happened to Jake. Some say he got lost, others believe he was taken by something lurking in those woods. But Emma, Sarah, and Matt never spoke of that night again. The scars it left behind were too deep, the fear too real. And every summer, when the woods grow quiet, they remember the sound of that scream, the scream that still haunts their nightmares. In the summer of 1998, a group of 5 inseparable friends, Rachel, Tom, Lisa, David, and Anna, decided to rent a secluded beach house for a week-long vacation. After years of hard work and the chaos of their early adulthood, this trip was meant to be a carefree escape from the stresses of their busy lives. They chose a remote stretch of coastline far from tourist crowds, nestled along the rugged cliffs of a small, forgotten town. It promised them privacy, adventure, and the sound of crashing waves under an endless summer sky. The beach house itself was a relic of the past. It stood tall against the horizon, its wooden structure weathered by decades of salty air and bracing winds. The faded blue shutters hung at odd angles, creaking when the wind blew too hard. The house had an undeniable charm, despite its age. The locals in the nearby town had mentioned that the house was over 100 years old, passed down through generations of the same family. It had stood the test of time, yet it had not been rented out in years. Some of the older townfolk hinted at strange occurrences surrounding the house, but the group was too excited to care. Upon arrival, they immediately fell in love with the view. The vast ocean stretched out before them, the beach deserted except for the occasional seabird. The house sat on a bluff, overlooking the sandy shore. The isolation was exactly what they had wanted. The first few days were idyllic, filled with laughter, long swims in the ocean, and lazy afternoons under the sun. They watched the sunset together from the porch each evening, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink as the waves softly rolled onto the shore. Everything seemed perfect, but on the third night, something changed. It started with Rachel. Late into the night, long after everyone had gone to bed, she was jolted awake by a strange sound. At first, she thought it was just the wind rattling the old house or the ocean waves crashing against the cliffs. But as she lay in bed, straining to listen, she realized it was something else entirely. Faint whispers, barely audible at first, seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding as she listened more closely. The whispers grew louder, though they were still too faint to fully understand. It sounded like a man and a woman speaking in hushed tones, but their words were muffled, as if they were coming from deep inside the walls. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. She got out of bed and walked over to the window, staring out into the night. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the beach. For a moment, Rachel thought she saw a figure standing near the edge of the water, just beyond the porch. She blinked, and the figure was gone. Shaken, she convinced herself it was just her mind playing tricks on her. After all, it was an old house, and old houses make noises. Maybe it was just the wind whispering through the cracks in the walls. The next morning, she told the others about the whispers, expecting them to take her seriously. But instead, they laughed it off. "Come on, Rach," Tom said with a grin. "It's probably just the old house settling. It's been here for over 100 years, after all." "Yeah," David added. "You're just spooking yourself. It's probably nothing." Rachel wanted to believe them, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The whispers had been too real, too clear to just be the wind. Still, not wanting to seem paranoid, she shrugged it off and tried to enjoy the rest of the day. That night, the whispers returned louder and more distinct than before. This time, Rachel wasn't the only one to hear them. Lisa, who was sleeping in the room next to Rachel's, woke up in the middle of the night to the same eerie sound. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding as she tried to make out the words. The whispers seemed to move through the walls, echoing as if the very structure of the house was alive. A cold sweat broke out on Lisa's skin as she listened, but like Rachel, she couldn't understand what the voices were saying. It was as if they were speaking in a language she didn't know. But one thing was clear: the voices were growing more intense. The next morning, Lisa hesitated to tell the group, but Rachel's worried expression told her everything. "You heard them too, didn't you?" Rachel asked quietly. Lisa nodded, her face pale. "It wasn't just the wind, Rachel. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't the wind." The mood in the house shifted. Even Tom, who had been so quick to dismiss Rachel's concerns, began to feel uneasy. The house, which had felt like a cozy getaway just days before, now felt suffocating. The air inside seemed heavier, almost oppressive, as if the walls were closing in on them. Tom and David suggested they all take a break from the house and spend the day outside. They packed up some food and drinks and set out for a hike along the cliffs, hoping to shake off the strange feeling that had settled over them. The fresh air and sunlight helped, and by the time they returned to the beach house, they were laughing and joking again, feeling more like themselves. But as the sun set and the shadows grew long, the unease returned. That night, the whispers were louder than ever. This time, all 5 of them heard it. It wasn't just the faint murmurs anymore, it was unmistakably voices, low and urgent, as if the people were arguing. Rachel, Tom, Lisa, David, and Anna gathered in the living room, their faces pale and tense. "Okay, this isn't normal," Tom said, finally admitting what they were all thinking. "There's something wrong with this house." "We should leave," Anna suggested, her voice shaking. "Let's just pack up and go." But as they gathered their things, the whispers grew louder, almost as if the house itself was angry that they were trying to leave. The lights flickered, and a chill swept through the room. David, who had always been the most rational of the group, stopped in his tracks. "Wait," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you hear that?" The others froze, listening. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a different sound: footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from upstairs. No one dared to move. The footsteps grew louder, descending the stairs. But when they turned to look, no one was there. The house was empty, yet the sound of footsteps echoed through the walls. Panic set in. Lisa was the first to bolt for the door, followed closely by the others. They fled into the night, leaving the beach house behind, their hearts racing as they stumbled down the bluff and onto the beach. They didn't stop running until they reached the small town they had driven through on their way in. Breathless and terrified, they found the local innkeeper, an old woman who had lived in the town her entire life. When they told her what had happened, her face grew serious. "That house," she said in a low voice, "hasn't been rented in years for a reason. People who stay there, they don't always come back. The ones who do aren't the same. You were lucky to leave when you did." She went on to explain that the beach house had a dark history. Years ago, a couple had lived there, a man and a woman. They had disappeared one night, without a trace. Some say they were murdered, others believe they simply vanished. But ever since then, strange things had happened in the house. Whispers in the walls, footsteps in the night, and the occasional sighting of shadowy figures near the water's edge. The group didn't need to hear any more. They left town the next morning, vowing never to speak of the beach house again. Years later, Rachel still thinks about that summer. Every so often she dreams of the beach house, standing lonely and silent on the bluff. And in her dreams, she can still hear the whispers, faint but unmistakable. They say that once you hear the voices in the vanishing beach house, they never truly leave you.